Call it what you will, call it me living under a rock, I really don't know what it is, but I had no idea about what was apparently a dumpster fire that was the game Immortals of Aveum, created by Ascendant Studios. Now this game just came out in summer of 2023, so it hasn't even been out a year yet. Apparently this game did very awful. Commercially, critically, it was actually kind of regarded as a pretty good game. It is a single-player first-person shooter, and I have to say from what I can see, it does look pretty cool. It's a AAA single-player shooter with a pretty cool plot, I think. And as some have pointed out, it checked off a lot of boxes of what gamers want from a good single-player FPS. But I don't know what it was. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of lessons to learn from this. I just don't know what it is as far as how they screwed up this game. I don't know if it was marketing or what, but the sales were incredibly awful. So awful, in fact, that it led to Ascendant Studios laying off about half of their employees. Well, today a lot of people were talking about this former developer that was involved in the creation of Immortals of Aveum. So this former dev expressed a ton of regret over the decision to release a game of its magnitude, stating that it was basically a very bad idea to have this game with the big budget that it brought along with it. So I guess the budget was approximately $125 million. And to put it in layman's terms, according to this developer, that is $125 million down the drain. Just a complete waste of money because this game, like I said, sold so poorly. Now, in this report that was just released with this former dev's comments, it was highlighted that of the $125 million budget, $85 million was for the development of the actual game itself, whereas $40 million of the $125 million was for marketing purposes. Now, I am not smart enough to know if games and movies are different in this aspect, but I remember hearing a statistic a while back about how with movies, they're like at least 50-50 for budget in terms of development versus marketing costs. So if you're spending $100 million on the development, then you're spending another $100 million on the actual marketing of the movie. And sometimes that number of the marketing is actually a little bit higher than the development. Again, that's just something I've heard, and that is just for movies. I don't know if it's the same for games. But if that is the case, maybe that would kind of answer the question of why, despite being a critically acclaimed, or at least highly regarded as a pretty good game, this would explain that, despite that, it got poor sales. If rather than, a 50-50 ratio, it was actually only about a third of the budget that was made up of the marketing costs. And this game checked a lot of boxes that people liked, like I said. One of those being that it lacked microtransactions. And I saw some talk from this, I did think it was kind of interesting, about how with single-player games, such as Immortals of Aveum in this case, it is more or less a flat revenue that you get just purely from game sales. And so if that flops, you're basically done. Whereas when you have microtransactions in games, especially live service games and or multiplayer games, these microtransactions can kind of fuel the ongoing revenue of that game. And you can think of that what you will. I just kind of saw some conversation going on about that because of this story. And I thought it was kind of interesting. It is a good point, but on the other hand, some people, especially in single player games, really want microtransactions to stay away, which I totally get. Overall, the report shedded light on just all the challenges that are going on right now in the gaming industry, especially for developers, and how this whole trend of layoffs in the gaming industry is not too common, unfortunately. Overall, this seemed to be like a great game that had a lot of passion behind the development. I hope the developers don't see it as a fail, just as a complete failure on their part. Rather, it really needs to be looked at more in a much wider scope. How did this fail, despite it being a good game according to the majority of people that reviewed it? I think a lot of that is not on the development team, but rather the marketing team or the people that are planning the budgets that go into the marketing. I think not only Ascendant Studios, but pretty much every gaming studio is now looking at this and making sure that they themselves do not make the same mistake. It is really a shame that half of Ascendant Studios just disappeared like a Thanos snap. Hopefully they bounce back, and hopefully they prioritize more of exactly what needs to go into their budget for future games.